This is Welcome to Camp Hither, which is book 9 in the Goosebumps HorrorLand series by RL Stine. Chapter 15. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The snake was a cottonmouth, venomous and deadly. The tongue darted out. Its tiny black eyes glowed, and it made an ugly hissing sound. I tried to back out of the cabin, but I bumped into Kelly. We all pressed against the cabin wall. Something moved in a top bunk. Then the sheets began to shift in both bunks. Snakes uncoiled. They rose up, pushing aside the bed sheets. I saw several snakes in every bed. They had been coiled under the sheets, but now they climbed up, raised themselves, preparing to strike. They're all poisonous, I choked out. I pointed. That's a copperhead. That's a rattlesnake. Where are the counselors? Heather cried in a tiny voice. How did the snakes get into their beds? The rattler slid out of the bed and landed silently on the cabin floor. A copperhead dropped from the top bunk and slithered down. The snakes had their eyes on us. They were coming for us. I spun away and lowered my shoulder to the screen door. I shoved it open and burst out of the cabin. Heather came running out next, her eyes wide with fright. Sid and Kelly were right behind her. We didn't say a word. We just ran, slipping on the wet grass. Our feet thudded hard. The only other sound was our huffing breaths. I turned and glanced back. They're following us, I gasped. Yes, the snakes were wriggling rapidly through the tall grass. I could see their heads bobbing, dark eyes catching the glow of a pale moonlight. 6 of them. Some snapped their jaws as they slid through the grass. So fast. They were gliding so fast. The moonlight made them shine like silver against the swaying grass. Silver monsters. Sid and Kelly ran past me, onto the dirt trail that led to our cabin. Heather fell behind. Hurry, I shouted to her. Then I turned and chased after my 2 bunkmates. A sharp pain cut into my side. I gasped and kept running. I could see our cabin up ahead. Would we be safe there? One of my flip-flops caught on a tree root and fell off. I stumbled, staggering forward to regain my balance, and I heard a scream behind me. Help! Help me! It got me! Heather's scream. Chapter 16. I screeched to a stop, swung around, and ran back toward my sister. I could see her sprawled face down on the ground. She was kicking her legs hard, pounding the grass with both fists. Boone, help me! She cried. And then I saw the silvery snake wrapped around her ankle, and the other snakes wriggling close behind her. Stop moving! Freeze! I shouted to her. Then I dove to the ground, landed hard on my knees. I carefully wrapped my hand around the cottonmouth, grasping it tightly behind its head. I lifted the head away from my sister's leg. Then slowly, I unwrapped the snake from her ankle. Heather pushed herself up. She climbed quickly to her feet. Oh, she moaned, I don't believe this. I can still feel it on my leg. Her whole body shuddered. I lowered the cottonmouth to the ground and hurled it toward the other snakes. Then I grabbed Heather's hand and pulled her away. She darted into the cabin. Then I ran to my cabin, 1 flip-flop off, 1 flip-flop on. Sid and Kelly were already inside. I slammed the door shut behind me. They had their faces pressed against the cabin window. I pushed up between my 2 new friends and squinted out the window. I stared out onto the path. Shadows shifted, the moonlight faded. No snakes. We still hadn't said a word. I shut my eyes and pictured those venomous snakes slowly unwinding in the counselors' beds. Again, I saw the sheets move and those snakes rise up, angry that we had awakened them. Too weird, I muttered. It's all too weird. Sid and Kelly nodded their heads. Their faces were tight with fear. My chest felt fluttery. My body was covered in a cold sweat. Tomorrow, I said, tomorrow at breakfast, I'm going to find Nathan. I'm going to force him to talk. I'm going to make him tell us what's up with this camp. 3 stars. We saw Nathan before breakfast. He came into the cabin and woke us up by playing a kazoo in our ears. Yawning, I glanced out the window. The sun was just rising over the trees. Rise and shine, Nathan chanted. Rise and shine, guys. He began spraying us with sunglow. I dropped to the floor. My pajama bottoms were all twisted. I shielded my eyes from the spray. Give me a break, I shouted. Nathan laughed. He started tooting his kazoo again. I grabbed it away from him. "We've got to talk to you," I said. His grin faded. "What's your problem, dude?" "We went to your cabin last night," Sid said. "Where were you?" "Yeah, where were the counselors?" I demanded. "Your cabin was filled with snakes." "Poisonous snakes," Kelly said. The three of us surrounded him. We stood with our fists on our hips, watching him, waiting for answers. Nathan blinked. "Take a breath," he said. "What were you guys doing out last night?" "Just answer our questions," I said. "I don't know anything about snakes," Nathan said. "We were camping, all the counselors. We slept in tents down by the lake." I stared at him. Was he lying? "It's a tradition," Nathan said. "The counselors always have a camp out the first week of camp." I poked the plastic kazoo into Nathan's stomach. "But what about the snakes sleeping in your beds?" I demanded. He shrugged. "I don't know. I don't understand it. Guess they saw an empty cabin, so they jumped at the chance for a warm bed." He's totally lying, I decided. "Nathan, we're not stupid. They were all venomous snakes, even pit vipers," I said. "All deadly. They didn't just sneak into your cabin because it was empty." Nathan shrugged again. "I just went to my cabin to change. I didn't see any snakes." He laughed. "You sure you little boys didn't have a scary nightmare?" he asked in a babyish voice. "All of us?" Kelly cried. "You think we all had the same nightmare?" "Beats me," Nathan said. "Really, I was in a tent all night. I don't know anything about snakes." I balled my hands into tight fists. He was definitely lying. How could I get him to tell us the truth? Maybe we should follow Roddy's example, I suddenly thought. Maybe we should get out of this camp as fast as we can. Nathan grabbed the kazoo out of my hand. "Get dressed, dudes," he said. "Stop staring at me like frightened rabbits. Wear your swim trunks to breakfast." "Swim trunks? Why?" I asked. "This morning you guys are going to practice for cabin wars. You're going to swim across the lake," Nathan said. Chapter 17. Nathan ran out of the cabin before we could say anything more. "What about all the mice?" Kelly asked me. "Up on the hill. We didn't ask Nathan about the mice." "He's not going to tell us the truth," I said. "He was lying about the snakes." I shook my head. "Also, we don't want him to know where we were sneaking around up there. We can't trust him." "What are we going to do?" Sid asked. "Now he's going to make us swim across the lake. I heard Roddy's story about Serpo, about how they feed the giant snake." I pulled my cell phone from my backpack. "I think we have to get out of this camp," I said. "I'm calling home." I started to punch in our number at home, but the silence made me stop. I stared at the phone. No service. Sid had a phone too. He checked it. Same story. It didn't work. We pulled on our swim trunks and went to breakfast. They had biscuits and gravy. I filled my plate, but then I couldn't eat anything. Sid, Kelly, and I were on our usual table. The counselors sat at a long table in front of the kitchen. Were they staring at us? Yes, they kept watching us while they talked and ate. Why were they keeping such a close eye on the three of us? I didn't like it. There were a lot of things not to like. Serpo, the room crammed with swarming mice, the lake, the venomous snakes in the cabin last night, chasing us, hunting us. I pictured poor frightened Roddy. Was he right about this camp? Camp Slither? Kids call this place Camp Slither because it's crawling with snakes? Those mice, they have to be food for Serpo. But are we food for Serpo too? I didn't even take one bite of my breakfast. I crossed the room to Heather's table. She had dark rings under her eyes. I could tell she hadn't been able to sleep. She was talking to two other girls. I leaned over her shoulder and whispered, "We have to get out of this camp," I said. "We're not safe here." She nodded. "Should I tell my friends?" "Yes," I said. "I think we're all in danger." After breakfast, the counselors were called to the main office for a short meeting. Outside the mess hall, I gathered my two bunkmates and some guys from other cabins. Heather brought her two friends. "We've got to figure out the best way to escape," I said. "The lake is on that side," I pointed, and we're surrounded by woods. So how do we get to a highway or a town? "Well, we can't swim for it," one of her friends said. "Oh, wait," Heather cried. "I might have a map." "Right," I said. "There was a map in the camp brochure. Did you bring it?" Heather nodded. "I think it's tucked in the bottom of my camp trunk." We followed Heather to Radler, her cabin. She slid out her trunk and began tearing through it. "Here it is." She pulled out the camp brochure. I grabbed it out of her hand. "Let me see the map." I started to unfold it, but something caught my eye. "Whoa, wait," I cried. "I knew something was terribly wrong here." I pointed to the back of the brochure. "Check this out." Everyone gathered close. I read it to them. "If you have any problems at all, come see me. My door is always open. Sincerely, Uncle Jerry Landers, head counselor. Huh? Heather's mouth dropped open. Who is Uncle Jerry? Sid grabbed the brochure and studied it. The head counselor is someone named Uncle Jerry? Why haven't we seen him? Don't you get it? This means that Dr. Crawler isn't the real head counselor, I said, my heart suddenly pounding. Dr. Crawler is some kind of fake. The kids all started talking at once. I could see that everyone was scared and confused. Heather and I finally got them all quiet. I'll bet Dr. Crawler has done something to Uncle Jerry, Heather said. I mean, like, Dr. Crawler is this evil guy who likes to feed kids to snakes, right? I'll ding-dong bet you he's kidnapped Uncle Jerry or something. Sounds like a scary movie I saw, Kelly said. Yeah, it sounds totally crazy, I said, but what if it's true? How do we find out? Sid asked. Simple. We try to find Uncle Jerry, I said. Chapter 18. We split up. Our plan was to search every building until we found a clue. Heather and I headed to the small building behind the main lodge at the edge of the woods. We knew that Dr. Crawler had his office there. Was he hiding Uncle Jerry somewhere in that building? A sign on the front door read, Staff only, campers keep out. My chest felt a little fluttery, and my legs were trembling. I don't like going places where I don't belong. But this was an emergency. Something was terribly wrong at Camp Hither. We pushed open the front door and crept inside. We stood in a narrow wood-paneled hallway, office doors on both sides. The office doors were all closed. The building was silent. I think Dr. Crawler is still at the counselor's meeting, Heather whispered. Good, I said. Carefully, slowly, I pushed open the first office door. I saw a lot of filing cabinets and a desk piled high with folders. We moved down the hall, opening the doors and peeking inside. The offices were all dark and empty. No one in this building, Heather whispered. Everyone's out. I pointed to the stairway at the end of the hall. We have to check upstairs, I said. My voice cracked. I wanted to get out of there. We made our way up the wooden stairs as quietly as we could. The air was hot up there, and the hall was narrow and dimly lit. I saw one closed door, almost hidden in shadow. Our footsteps echoed off the hardwood floor. The door had a name stenciled on it in black. It read Uncle Jerry. Heather and I exchanged glances. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I started to turn it, then stopped. I knocked on the door instead. We both gasped when a voice inside called, Come in! I froze. Is that you, Uncle Jerry? I stammered. Yes, come in. I took a deep breath, turned the knob, pushed open the door. Heather and I both let out startled cries. Dr. Crawler grinned at us from behind the desk. His eyes flashed, and his grin grew wider until I could see all his teeth. And they were pointed? Come in, he said, waving us in. Should we run away? Not if we want to get to the bottom of this. We stepped into the office. There were 2 chairs behind the wide black steel desk. Dr. Crawler sat in one, his long fingers tapping the desk. The other chair faced away from us. I cleared my throat. We're looking for Uncle Jerry, I choked out. Dr. Crawler nodded. Boone, Heather, good work. You found him, he said. I squinted at him. Excuse me? We found him? Where? Right here, Dr. Crawler said. He spun the other chair around. My sister and I both jumped back when we saw the enormous cottonmouth snake coiled in the chair. Don't be scared, guys, Dr. Crawler said. This is Uncle Jerry. Chapter 19. I swallowed hard. Beside me, Heather backed up toward the office door. The snake tilted its head as if studying us. Its tongue licked the corners of its mouth. Uncle Jerry can't be a snake, I stammered. I balled my hands into fists. Dr. Crawler grinned his pointy-toothed smile. Would I lie to you, Boone? The snake arched its head, rose up taller in the chair, and opened its mouth with a long hiss. Boone, let's go, Heather whispered from behind me. No, I want to know the truth, I told her. Sure, I was scared, so scared I could barely breathe, but I was angry, too. I had to know what was really going on in this camp. Was Roddy right about everything? Uncle Jerry had a little accident in the lab, Dr. Crawler said, but I don't want you kids to worry. I'm taking very good care of him, and the others. Others? The big cottonmouth in the chair snapped its jaws, and suddenly I just lost it. I let out a scream and dove forward. I grabbed Dr. Crawler by the arms, and I started shouting, Tell us the truth! Tell us the truth! I shook him hard. He tried to pull back, but I held on tight, and something happened. Something slid in my hands. It took me a long while to realize it was his skin. Mr. Crawler's skin began to slide off. As I tugged his arms, the skin pulled out from his shirt sleeves. It felt kind of like shrink wrap, only it was flaky and dry and warm. I tried to let go, but the skin stuck to my hands. I choked and started to gag. I staggered back. More skin rolled off his body, off his face, his chest. Dr. Crawler was shedding his skin like a snake. I stood there, gasping, and as the skin came off in my hands, I saw that his human body wasn't real. His clothing collapsed in a heap on the floor. His body started to shrink. I watched in horror as his head, his arms, his legs vanished. A few seconds later, Dr. Crawler was gone, and a long hissing snake crawled out from one of his pant legs. A copperhead snake. Heather and I stood frozen. Now there were 2 snakes in front of us. The skin dropped from my hands and spilled silently to the floor. "You shouldn't have done that," Uncle Jerry hissed. You can speak," I gasped. "My brain is human," Uncle Jerry replied in a dry whisper that sounded like crackling leaves. "I can speak, and I can bite." "Now we have no choice," Dr. Crawler uttered. "Boone, let's go," Heather screamed. I turned to run, but the doorway filled with snakes. 6 or 7 poisonous snakes coiling and curling on each other, blocking our escape. "Don't try anything foolish," Dr. Crawler hissed. Their bite is sharp, and their poison works in seconds." It's venom, by the way, not poison. Chapter 20. Nathan and the other counselors appeared in the doorway. They stepped over the knot of snakes. They didn't say a word. The counselors forced us outside and up the hill, to the low building we had seen the night before. Dr. Crawler, Uncle Jerry, and the other snakes slithered beside us, pulling themselves silently through the tall grass. "Our lab was here for many years," Dr. Crawler said. "We were scientists studying snake venom," Uncle Jerry hissed. "We were trying to find antidotes, way to cure the poison. We injected ourselves in the young people who worked for us, but we made a terrible mistake. We wanted to be famous," Dr. Crawler said in a crackling whisper, "so we injected ourselves too soon. We all became snakes. We're trying to reverse it all," Dr. Crawler said. "Some of us are almost back to normal. Some of us become human in the daytime, but it wears off by night. At night, we become snakes again." Heather and I both gasped. The counselor's cabin, those snakes in the beds. They were Nathan and the other counselors, humans who turned into snakes at night. "What about Serpo?" I cried. "Is that true too?" "Serpo?" Uncle Jerry hissed. "That's a stupid old legend. Who would believe a story like that?" "But all the mice," I said. The 2 snakes flicked their tongues. We have to eat, don't we?" "Excuse me. Why are you taking us up here?" Heather cried. "What are you going to do to us?" "We need you in the lab," Dr. Crawler said. "We don't want to stay snakes forever. We need fresh humans to do our tests on," Uncle Jerry added. "That's why we started this camp. We need to experiment to find the right formula to make us human again." "Experiment?" I cried. "Yes, and we have to do it fast," Dr. Crawler said. "The townspeople have been getting suspicious. Too many questions. The police will be closing in on us soon, so we have to act." We reached the top of the hill. The long building came into view. Nathan and the other counselors shoved us forward. The hissing sound started up again, so loud I covered my ears. "What is that?" I cried. "Tell me the truth. What's the hissing sound?" "You'll soon find out," Nathan murmured. "Real soon." He and the other counselors pushed us through the front door. We stepped into a large science lab. Enormous machines lined the walls, humming loudly. The ceiling was covered with tangled cords and cables. A dozen computer screens blinked and flickered. Against one wall, metal cones hung down on long cords from the ceiling. The machines began to hiss, as if letting out steam. I turned to my sister. "Heather," I said, shouting over the noise, "the hissing we heard. It wasn't snakes. It was these machines." The snakes crawled over each other, forming a tight knot guarding the door. The counselors pushed us across the huge room. Just cooperate, Nathan whispered. Maybe you'll end up in the same body you started with. Huh? Those words sent a cold shiver down my back. Against the far wall, I saw a boy. He had a metal cone pulled down on his head. As we walked closer, I recognized the boy. Roddy, I shouted. Roddy, you're here! Roddy turned to us. He opened his mouth to speak, and Heather and I both uttered horrified cries. Roddy had a thin, black, forked tongue. Chapter 21. The counselors surrounded us. Dr. Crawler slithered in front of Roddy. This boy is helping us, he said, and now you will too. I've been preparing you since you arrived. Preparing us? I cried. What do you mean? Dr. Crawler's shiny snake eyes flashed with excitement. The Sunglow spray isn't sun protection, he said. It's snake DNA. Your skin is soaked with it, Uncle Jerry said. Now let's see if we can find the right power level to transform you into snakes. Transform us into snakes? Heather cried. Why? We need to change you into poisonous snakes so that we can figure out how to change you back into humans, Uncle Jerry said. If we can change you back to humans, we'll know how to change ourselves back to humans. My whole body shuddered. What would it feel like to be a snake? I didn't want to find out. I lowered my head like a football running back and took off. I got about 4 steps. Nathan tackled me and brought me down to the floor. Snakes slithered over and wrapped themselves around my legs. When I looked up, counselors had already pulled a metal cone over Heather's head. I couldn't escape. I couldn't help her. The counselors pushed me to the wall between Roddy and my sister. They fastened a metal cone over my head. It doesn't hurt, Nathan whispered. But I don't want to be a snake, I screamed. Neither do I, he muttered. He pulled the metal cone lower on my head. Uncle Jerry slithered in front of us. The big hissing machines send the power into the metal cones. The power works with the snake DNA to change you. Your friend Roddy is already helping us, Dr. Crawler hissed. He turned to Uncle Jerry. Let's see if we have any success with him today. No, don't hurt him, I shouted. Don't do it, please. The hissing grew to a deafening roar. It sounded like 100 fire hoses going off at once. Nathan crossed the lab to a huge panel control. He threw a switch. Roddy let out a groan. His black snake tongue flicked in and out. His knees collapsed. His body started to twitch and vibrate. Bright white and yellow sparks shot out of the helmet. Stop it! Stop it! Heather and I both screamed. I gaped in horror as Roddy's body appeared to melt away. He melted right out of his clothes. A few seconds later, he was a snake. A long yellow snake with bright red stripes, crawling on the floor in front of us. Chapter 22. Success, Dr. Crawler cried. He raised himself tall and did a kind of shuffling snake dance. We are doing well today, Uncle Jerry agreed. Getting very close. Soon you will be snakes too. Snakes we can try to change back to humans. You can't do this, Heather screamed. Let us go. You cannot get away with this. Roddy, now a long, thick snake, crawled over the floor toward my sister and me. I watched him move, studying his red and yellow stripe pattern. Let's try you next, Boone, Dr. Crawler hissed. He bobbed his head toward Nathan. No, please, I cried, please. Once again, Nathan threw a switch. I felt the cone over my head start to vibrate. My head began to tingle. My eyes blurred. My whole body throbbed as if I'd stuck my finger in an electrical socket. Last chance, Boone, I told myself. Last chance before you become a snake. I signaled to my sister. I pointed frantically. Yes, after a few seconds she understood me. Heather raised her arm and rattled her bracelet as hard as she could. The sound startled Dr. Crawler and Uncle Jerry. I saw their heads whip around. It gave me 1 second to move. I tore off the vibrating cone and dove to the floor. I grabbed Roddy. The big snake wriggled in my hands. I raised it high over my head. Dr. Crawler's eyes flashed. What are you doing with that snake? He hissed. I held the snake high. Do you know the biggest predators of snakes? I demanded. Do you know the biggest enemies of snakes? Dr. Crawler pulled his head back. I know that man is the first, he replied. Humans are the biggest enemy of snakes. And the second biggest enemy? I cried. You should know this. The two startled snakes stared at me. The king snake is the second biggest enemy, I told them. King snakes love to eat other snakes. And guess what? You just turned Roddy into a king snake. I didn't give them a chance to move. I heaved the king snake onto Dr. Crawler. Dr. Crawler arched his head. He tried to squirm away. The king snake let out a warning hiss, but Dr. Crawler opened his jaws and attacked first. His head darted forward as he snapped at Roddy's throat. Roddy pulled his head back. Dr. Crawler missed and accidentally bit himself. Heather pulled herself free of the metal cone. We both watched as the venom instantly shot through Dr. Crawler's body. He poisoned himself, Heather cried. Dr. Crawler slumped heavily to the floor. He didn't move. The counselors uttered cries of shock and horror. Uncle Jerry stared down at Dr. Crawler, then started for the door. The snakes all began to hiss at once. And then they all turned and wriggled and slithered furiously, followed Uncle Jerry out of the lab. I watched them fleeing down the hill. Their leader was dead. They were defeated. I turned to Heather and uttered a shocked cry. Roddy stood beside her, looking like his old human self. He shook his head, confused. I'm a little dizzy, he said. I guess Dr. Crawler's experiment was a failure, I said. It only lasted for 5 minutes. 5 minutes was plenty, Roddy said. I told you this camp was creepy. Look at me. I'm all dusty from crawling on the floor. Yuck. Next summer, I'm going to Latin camp. Chapter 23. A happy ending for everyone but the snakes. The next day, Mom and Dad picked us up. We tried to explain why camp closed early. We told them the whole story, but I don't think they believed us. Who would? Heather and I sat in the back seat, watching the trees speed by, happy to be going home. Why do you have that grin on your face? Heather asked. I'll show you, I said. I reached into my backpack. I pulled out a little garden snake. I handed it to my sister. What's this, Boone? Heather asked. A present, I said. You never shut up about how no one remembered your birthday, so I picked it up for you this morning. Happy birthday. She stared at it. For my birthday? Are you crazy? And before I could answer, the snake opened its jaws and hissed, Many happy returns. The end.